Owning a home has been the backbone for middle-class wealth creation for decades. And while prices have historically always gotten more expensive, something has shifted, particularly in the last couple of years, that has changed the dynamic of real estate, probably for the foreseeable future. And because of this, it begs the question, is owning a home really, truly an investment like it used to be? And here's the problem with that question. If the answer is yes, then all that means is that more people, primarily from the most important economic group, the middle class, are being priced out of owning one of the most important wealth-generating assets there is. And if instead the answer is no, then where is the middle class? The group that is too rich to benefit from government assistance, yet not wealthy enough to benefit or have access to a lot of the alternative investments the 1% have access to. Where are they supposed to turn instead? It seems like the middle class is once again stuck between a rock and a hard place. In this video, let's first and foremost try to answer that question, and then let's talk about what the implications are for our future. Let's get started. First, we must define the two major types of home ownership. There's ownership for personal use, and there's home ownership for income generation, owning a rental property. In the past, both of these were considered valuable, and both were considered good ways at building net worth. The main difference between these two is that when you own a home to live in, you are paying a monthly mortgage, but you are not generating a monthly income, so you have a net outward expense. Because of this, you build wealth in two main ways: equity buildup from the principal portion of the mortgage payment and appreciation of the property. When it comes to owning an income generating property, you add one more way of building wealth: rental income, but only if that rental income exceeds the interest portion of the monthly mortgage payment, which is the cost, and exceeds the maintenance expense. Now, there are also some major tax benefits that come with owning income property, but in the name of simplicity, we'll refrain in this video. Now, here's something that a lot of people miss, and this is something very important. This wealth building in either personal property or rental property is only true if the value of the appreciation and the rental income, in the case of income property, exceeds the cost of the interest portion of the mortgage and the yearly inflation rate. If your property increases in value by 3% and the inflation rate was 4% for the year, you didn't really make money and you didn't build wealth. Now, luckily, for homeowners at least, real estate values are usually a leading driver of inflation, which means they usually appreciate by more than the average inflation rate per year. The other thing I said is that the equity buildup via mortgage payments and appreciation, plus rental income if it's a rental property, must be greater than the cost of the mortgage. That cost is the interest rate in order for you to actually make money. This is why, even in the most lucrative times, historically for real estate, it only really made sense if you were going to own the property, at least when it comes to personal property, which is what I think most people are interested in, for at least a few years, to allow appreciation and equity buildup to catch up and surpass the cost of the loan. Because remember, mortgages are front-loaded for interest, which means the first few years of payment are made up almost entirely of interest and very little principal, which means very little equity accumulation. And now that we understand this base, we can start to answer the question. And we're going to focus primarily on personal property because that's what most people are most likely considering purchasing. Is owning a home even an investment anymore? There are three major costs to owning a home that one must overcome to make it worthwhile: the interest portion of a mortgage, the inflation rate, and maintenance. And precisely because of these costs, you're going to start to see a massive difference between purchasing a home, say, between 2008 and 2021, compared to today. The average interest rate between 2008 and 2021 was 6%, 5%, 4.7%, 4.45, 3.66, 3.98, 4.17, 3.85, 3.65, 3.99, 4.45, 3.94, 3.11, and 2.96. Today, close to 7%. What does this mean? This means that your home must appreciate almost double, at least in the beginning, compared to what it had to just a few years earlier, just in order to cover one of these three costs, the mortgage cost, which is the interest rate. And because of this, we have to ask another question. After the meteoric rise of real estate prices since 2020, is there enough room left in the market for prices to rise higher than 7% per year just to cover the interest? After the crash of 2008, home values were extremely suppressed, which means that those who bought after not only benefited from a much lower interest rate hurdle to jump over to make their investment worthwhile, but they knew home prices could go much higher, as they already had in the past. That is not the case today, as home prices are hovering very close to their all-time highs. So, can they go higher to cover the more expensive interest rate cost? Now, I am leaving out a key piece of information. So if you're yelling at your screen right now, I understand. Just bear with me for a second. Before we get there, we have to talk about inflation. In order to make an investment worthwhile, you must cover the inflation rate. If not, you are losing purchasing power, even though on paper you are gaining net worth. And just a few years ago, the inflation rate was much lower, meaning again that those who bought homes in the 2010s also had a lower second hurdle to jump over appreciation-wise to cover inflation. Inflation even today is still much higher, although it is coming down. It peaked at over 9% just 2 years ago. Now, officially, the inflation rate is down to the 3.5% range. But to put that into perspective, that is still almost a 100% higher burden that a homeowner must cover today than if the rate was closer to the Federal Reserve's target rate of 2%, which it did hover much closer to again in the 2010s. Now, at this point, you're probably thinking that I think that real estate is not a worthwhile investment anymore. That's not necessarily the case. Let's talk about that key piece of missing information, the mortgage interest rate. I said that because it's higher, homeowners today have a much higher burden to cover in order to make their home an investment. That is true, but the burden lowers over time. And that's because the payment schedule of a mortgage is front-loaded with interest. Basically, with every passing year, your payment will consist a little less of interest and a little more of equity. And remember, the equity portion of a mortgage is almost like a piggy bank. You're trading cash net worth for equity net worth, but that portion of the mortgage does not change your total net worth. Only the interest portion does, because that is the true cost that you pay to the lender. And this vital piece of information is what, in my opinion, still makes purchasing a home a valuable investment, but only in one specific scenario. And that is that you do not plan to move, or at least sell the home for many years. And that's because only in that scenario will you have had the time to switch from paying mostly interest to mostly principal. And you'll have allowed enough time for appreciation to catch up and surpass the maintenance costs and the interest costs and hopefully the inflation costs to make your home a worthwhile investment. I still think buying a home is a good choice for many reasons, some not finance related, like just having a place to call your own. But the main difference between today and say 5 or 10 years ago is that your break-even point, the point where your home starts making you money instead of costing you money, is much further away. In 2012, 2015, 2020, especially 2020, right before home values skyrocketed, your break-even point could have been just a few years away, sometimes even less. Now, realistically, it's probably closer to 10. And that's assuming the real estate market doesn't crash, which I don't think it will, but that's topic for another video. But that's also assuming that prices keep rising, not just stagnating where they are. And that I'm less certain of. Again, topic for another video. The point is, right now, in order to make owning a home worthwhile, you need to be there, or at least continue to own the home for much longer than before. Now, in the grand scheme of things, does 3 years compared to 10 years really matter if you're trying to build wealth long term, say for retirement? No, not really, at least not a ton, but it does matter for those who see themselves moving in just a few years. Because for those specific people, perhaps even yourself, in those instances, costs will far exceed profits. So much so that the total cost of renting for a couple of years may actually be lower than the cost of owning during that same period. Now, does that mean that renting is better than buying? No, but what it does mean is that if you're going to look at it from a personal finance point of view, renting needs to be looked at for what it is. Not a second tier bad choice, but as an option that can make financial sense in certain circumstances. So, do I think that you should buy a home if you can afford one? Yes, I do, but only if you're going to be there for much longer than you'd have to just a few years ago.